The new Wuthering Heights movie looks like absolute garbage. Typically, I'm not this passionate about something that I haven't yet consumed, regardless of the kind of medium that it comes in. But I have a lot of reasons why I am unsettled about a lot of the information that's coming out about this film, how it's being marketed. I wanted to get into this, but also I just want to address before I do that I'm sure there are a lot of people, one, that are very tired already of hearing about this movie. It's one of those things of everything I've heard about this is against my will sort of feelings, I think, that is probably pretty true for a lot of us. I can completely understand the fatigue of this movie, even though it's not yet out. And of course, there's going to be, I'm sure, so many more conversations about it once it officially is. But I did still want to talk about it. One, because there are so many things to dive into. Two, because a lot of us are big fans of fiction. If you watch this channel, that is something I think is kind of the core thing that a lot of us have in common. And adaptation news is something that a lot of us have a lot of thoughts on. So I'll do a deep dive into what we think makes for a good adaptation versus a bad one, and what things you want to keep true to it, what things you don't. I'll save that for a future video, but I thought this could be a good catalyst for that conversation, because this feels like the blueprint of everything you do not want to do. The other reason I wanted to talk about all this is because even though I'm sure there is a feeling of fatigue already occurring, I also know that a lot of times people have this mindset of there's no such thing as bad press. The more you talk about something, the more likely it is to have success, because you're building curiosity in people. And it's not that I want to dissuade you or make you feel bad if you do want to go see it. If you already are like, no, I want to see this, or all the things that you are getting about it, you're like, that has my interest piqued, I want to go see it. If that's you, go see the movie, enjoy yourself as best you can. Have your own thoughts and opinions, of course. I'm not trying to police anybody or tell anybody how to feel. But I do think there are a lot of people that maybe don't know some of the ins and outs that have gone into this film, or that haven't. It might actually be helpful for you to know additional information about it so that you don't waste your money. Personally, I am not going to spend a dime on this. I find so much of how they've gone about it to be extremely, extremely careless. And also, some of it just feels like an effort to make money, not to make art. And I do take issue with that, among other things. So we'll officially jump into it. We're going to break this down into 3 sections. The first part and the bulk of the video is primarily going to be focused on the book accuracy that we're seeing in the film. Also, a little bit of a tiny conversation about how accurate do you even have to be when you're adapting something, the casting, and the general aesthetics of the movie. So that's going to be the main focus for today. We will also, tied in with that, get into some notes about some of the information from early screenings of this film, which is where I think a lot of my concerns really started to bubble up. And then last, we'll briefly address the showmance of it all. That term is specifically referring to the ways in which actors, when they're doing press, are either encouraged to or willingly decide to create this sense of fantasy around themselves, because if they are in some ways representing their characters, and if there is some kind of romantic or there's some tension-filled aspect to the relationship in the film, they try to embody that on their press tour, regardless of whether they themselves are in relationships or regardless of a number of factors. And we'll briefly address that because a lot of us, speaking of fatigue, a lot of us are very fatigued of this. We've seen it happen time and time again. Some of its origins are actually exceptionally terrible. And in addition to all the ways in which I think that this shows how not to do a book adaptation, I think the showmance angle of all of this is very much showing how not to market a film. A quick note, I will likely at times reference certain things about the book. It is a book that's about 175 years old, so apologies though if you've always wanted to read it. I will try to have some kind of spoiler warning on the screen if I do mention something, but some of the things I want to mention, they are relevant to why I feel that this adaptation is not only butchering the source material, but they're kind of spitting in its face. All that said though, let's jump into specifically some of the early screenings and early information. So I will have this article linked. This is by The Guardian. This actually came out quite a bit before the movie's upcoming release date. It starts by saying that it is aggressively provocative. Test screenings of Saltburn director's Wuthering Heights gets mixed reaction. Some of the things that are referenced in this are very adult, and I know that sometimes some of you listen do my videos with your kids around, so I'm going to try to filter what I say, but I'll have things on the screen so that you can read it for yourselves in case my filtering is not coherent to you. So it starts by saying equal parts intrigue and skepticism has already dogged the forthcoming adaptation of Wuthering Heights from Emerald Fennell, whose first two films, Promising Young Woman and Saltburn, displayed a love of mordant and explicit envelope pushing. As reported by World of Real, a first test screening for the film, which stars Margot Robbie and Saltburn's Jacob Elordi, took place earlier this week in Dallas, and audience reaction was mixed. One attender described the film as aggressively provocative and tonally abrasive, and suggested it strongly recalled the stylized depravity of Saltburn with scenes of clinical enjoyment, a bondage-tinged sexual encounter involving horse reins. The film reportedly opens with a public hanging in which the condemned man finishes his sentence, and a nun fondles the corpse. Other signature Fennell shots include lingering takes of, quote, suggestive textures such as egg yolks, bread dough, and slug trails. Skipping ahead a little bit to some comments by the casting director, it says she defended her choices after many suggested that Robbie was too old to play the role of Catherine, as well as questioning Elordi's ethnicity, since Heathcliff, the foundling with whom she falls in love, is generally perceived to have a Romani background. Recently, when asked about it directly, the director said, I think the thing is everyone who loves this book has such a personal connection to it, and so you can only ever kind of make the movie that you sort of imagined yourself when you read it, and then you can, I don't know, I think I was sort of focusing kind of sadomasochistic elements of it, and so that's a great thing about the movie, is it could be made every year. The casting director, in response to these criticisms, said there was no need to be accurate, as the source material is, quote, just a book. She continued, there's definitely going to be some English lit fans that are not going to be happy. Wait until you see the set design, because that is even more shocking, and there may or may not be a dog collar in it. Some people, their only means of actually trying to convey anything is to get a reaction out of people, and they have decided that that's art. The parallel that I give at times is when somebody, I mean, we talk about how art can come in so many different forms, and sometimes what art is saying, it does evoke something in us, and it can mean more than something that is simply obvious in the amount of skill that it took to create. But there are times where people, I think, misunderstand that just creating a reaction doesn't necessarily mean you're saying much of anything. But if you have enough people surrounding you and propping you up and telling you, actually, no, what you're saying is brilliant, sometimes you lose sight of the plot a little bit, which is ironic in this case because it's pretty hard to lose sight of the plot because there's a book that tells you everything it's trying to say. And sure, some things are up for interpretation. But anyway, the example that I often give of this, I think these two ideas of, okay, you can be saying something and maybe it's not the most amazing work of art, but the theme behind it, and sometimes even the simplicity behind it, that is genuinely evocative in some fashion versus just being shocking, is if somebody walked into a middle of a room and they just urinated all over the floor and then they pointed to it and they're like, look at, it's art. Then all these other people came around them. They're like, oh yes, it is art. And clearly what you meant by that is that we live in this society that tries to hide away all of the disgusting things, but we need these things to be out in the open. And then you have the janitor coming along like, do I have to clean this up? Because most of the time, these sorts of things, it does feel a little bit like they're reinforced by people who have a certain level of privilege, which I actually would argue that some of what we're going to talk about today, I think does. But I actually want to directly respond to some of the things here. First off, in case you're wondering, that's not how Wuthering Heights opens. But I'm not even somebody that needs things to be exactly the same as the source material. There are times where you can go outside the source material, and generally it's respected by sometimes the creator and the fans of the work that you're adapting. I think a really good example of this is Howl's Moving Castle by Studio Ghibli. Miyazaki took a lot of care with that. He also did a lot of things in that are different from the novel, but it still kind of holds true to a lot of what made that novel special for a lot of individuals, what he obviously felt was worth adapting into another medium so that even more people could come to that story, and he added some of his own themes into it. Oftentimes Miyazaki puts very anti-war and violence themes into his films, which he did in Howl's Moving Castle as well. So there's there are opportunities to do things that are different. And yes, of course, you're always going to have the book purists that no matter what, if you deviate the smallest amount, they're going to be displeased. But I actually think that's a much smaller percentage of people, because most of us recognize that when you're having a different medium, you are incorporating different things. Obviously, books are primarily just something that the words themselves are trying to convey something within our imaginations. And you have the opportunity when you do it in film or on shows, you have the opportunity to then add music into the equation. You can see the actors, their faces, their expressions. There are so many other ways to convey what the words were conveying before. So we recognize that, okay, well, that's already changing things a little bit, which means that sometimes there are ways that you can be more efficient or ways that you actually want to expand on certain things and deviate, and it can still work. And you can still have a hybrid of the original creator's work and what they were saying alongside with your vision. You can tie these things together. So the casting director's comment about wait till the English lit fans see the set, that's way more extreme, really speaks to how much they don't really grasp what it is that readers care about and what people in general care about. You don't even have to be a reader. You don't even have to have read this book. But when you value creatives and you value art, no, there are certain things that matter to us more than others, and the aesthetics matter a little bit less to the majority of us. This idea that somehow completely changing Heathcliff is going to be less of a big deal to us than, oh, look, their clothes are purposefully stylized and aren't period accurate. You're really missing the point. Most people can recognize that sometimes you want to have a hyper stylized look. You want to say something, and you can use the environment to say it perhaps in a way that was different than what was described in the book. But if the end goal is to amplify the themes in this visual medium, then a lot of people there are going to be people that don't like it. I want to be clear about that. There are going to be plenty of people that would prefer the period accurate aspect of things. But if it's very clear that that's not what you were doing and you did change it, but in service of the story, there are going to be people that are like, okay, this was definitely different and it was weird and out there and it kind of looks like a Tim Burton film almost, but at least you're owning that and you know what that is. The casting, though, you did not get out of the book what the book was saying. And I am not normally somebody who is gatekeeping interpretation, but interpretation relies on the ability for there to be multiple ways of viewing something. Heathcliff is directly stated on page numerous times to not only be dark-skinned, but also to have certain features that are typically not associated with people who are white. There are a number of instances where it directly says this. The director of the film, I think that her response is a little bit more wishy-washy than the casting directors. I think the casting director being like, it's just a book. You're like, well, then why are you adapting it? That's kind of a question I have too. If it's just a book, then why are you adapting it? Just make your own thing then. But it actually, I mean, just to... we can make a whole video about that statement alone of being like, it's just a book. Well, it's just a book that has been remade a number of times and people keep missing the mark because people apparently don't have very good reading comprehension. The actual director, though, had a comment that was very, I think they were trying to kind of avoid getting too in the specifics, but it actually is a little concerning. I don't know if they even really mean what they're saying or if they're just trying to skirt the question. The core of what she said was basically, honestly, if you boil it down to the core of it, she's saying, I didn't picture him that way. I don't know how you don't picture him exactly how he's described. I know sometimes you can't really control, for whatever reason, if you just get it in your head. Let's say you pick up a book tomorrow and you just can't get out of your head a certain actor or famous person, or maybe even somebody you know. Maybe there's a character you hate and it reminds you so much of your stupid coworker and you cannot stop thinking, oh, that person is basically Joe from work and that's who I see here. I recognize that happens and sometimes it's just something that pops into your head. But if you're gonna adapt it, you gotta rein it in a little. I recognize that you want to bring your vision to it, but I mean, your vision absolutely relies on him looking exactly like Jacob Elordi, basically? Are you serious? It directly states that's not what he looks like. Second, it's so significant to his character. If you know nothing about Wuthering Heights, first off, it's not a romantic story. So already the marketing of this is missing the mark. But he is abusive. He is angry all the time. But you also look at when he was young, and he was heavily mistreated by essentially everyone around him. He was found, and clearly nobody was caring for him when he was a young boy. Someone takes him in, and they are trying to be like a father to him. The wife, which would be almost like his stepmom at this point, is terrible to him. What would basically be his stepbrother is terrible to him. And a lot of people mistreat him. They see him as this thing because of the fact that he is not white. It doesn't flat out say, and also, in case you missed it, he's being treated this way because he's not white. It doesn't straight out say that, but that is why they treat him that way. You see the ways in which all the characters think about him, talk about him, how they act around him. And from a young age, he is put down because he is a man of color. And now for the specifics as to what exactly are his features. Does he come from this place or this place? The casting, actually, bizarrely, this is why it's so bizarre that they picked Jacob Elordi. The casting could have had so many different actors up for this role because of the fact that it doesn't actually matter exactly what his features looked like. Part of it is that none of them even can tell. None of them bother ever to ask. They don't know. They're just like, you look different. You look dark-skinned with dark hair. And as a result of thinking that about him, it's not about you came from this place. It's not about this is the country that your family originated from. It's not about any of that. It's just about othering him because he looks different. So you had so many options. And yet you still were like, I just don't see him that way. I just don't. This wouldn't have been great, but I could have maybe understood if you were like, all of these people in this story are so hyper-focused on how white you are, basically. That somebody who just happens to have darker hair and darker eyes, to them, they're like, oh, you must be fill in the blank word that is not very kind. Which they say in the book, they say certain things about him and what he looks like. Just simply because he doesn't look like Margot Robbie, basically. And if that was the interpretation of, well, I just wanted to show how they're so racist that even somebody having darker hair or darker eyes or both is enough for them to decide that you are less than, because that's how much they care about like the purity of your whiteness. If that was the goal, it's still not exactly accurate, and I would still question and feel like, kind of maybe feels like you just didn't want to cast someone else. Kind of feels like you've worked with Jacob Elordi before. You like this actor. He's really big right now. Kind of feels like you just wanted to put him in there. But at least maybe I would kind of understand. But this answer of like, it's just not really what like I wanted to capture what I envisioned gets so much worse when you see that they cast the side characters with people of color. So it's like, wait, you can see the help in the film that you can envision as a person of color, but the lead, you can't? You should question that. As for the age of the characters themselves, I do think it makes sense to slightly up the age of the characters, or have actors that are older than the characters in the book, because I mean, I think most of us don't need to have explained to us why it might be a little odd to have an actual 16-year-old actor playing the role of some of these characters. This is, of course, not the first time that there has been controversy around changing the appearance of the character through how you cast them versus what they were described as in a book, or what they look like if it was originally an animated thing, or if you're doing a remake of some kind. People have different opinions about how accurate it should be. My personal principle about this is that if there are certain features that are very significant to the character, those features should be maintained. So this does tie back to, in this instance, is it absolutely necessary for the characters to be actually 16, 17, 18 years old? Not necessarily. You can still have the themes. I would prefer if it was still portrayed like they're slightly younger, because I do think there is a level of possession and control of somebody, especially a young person, and how trapped young people are, especially if you have somebody above them, an adult above them, that reigns over them. It does speak to why they get trapped in certain situations, their inability to escape these abusive environments. So I do think that there is a sense of youth playing a role in this particular instance, but age is not always super, super significant. Also, sometimes, for example, the color of a person's hair. I don't really care that Margot Robbie is blonde when Catherine is supposed to have slightly darker hair. It's not like I'm sitting here thinking there's no way this is going to be any good because she's supposed to be a brunette. That's not really significant to the character. If there is a character where something about their physical features ties to the significance of them and their motivations, their backstory, then I do think you should maintain that. So, Heathcliff, I don't even have to really point to another example because Heathcliff is an example of a character that you should be maintaining the fact that he is a person of color, because it directly ties to why he turns out the way he turns out. Having people from the time you are young belittle you and mistreat you, and then you kind of take it upon yourself, or at least this is one of the pieces of the story. You kind of think that if you can just possess everything that the rest of society holds valuable, it will somehow make up for the fact that you can't change your appearance, which you do see Heathcliff do. He acquires an immense amount of wealth, and then he tries to possess the things that were kind of uplifting other people around him. So and then he tries to take them down, and it's like this way of proving to himself that he is worthy, but he's looking for it in all the wrong places. But you also see him do this with Catherine. That's why their relationship is so tremendously terrible. And then Catherine does care about him, and I think she has tried to shield him in her own way, but she's also a product of her own society, so there's a tragedy with her as well. It's a tragic story, but it's also showcasing cycles of abuse, and in Heathcliff's case, part of that originates with the fact that he was mistreated because of how he looks. So to completely not only disregard that, but to then cast somebody who kind of just represents a lot of what their society would be okay with, you do miss the mark. And I don't really know how you can justify envisioning him this way, because it's like, well, the book does directly contradict. It directly contradicts, which means in this instance, you are just incorrect. I already am very skeptical that you understand the rest of the themes. Now, can you still show cycles of abuse if you are specifically in this instance wanting to zero in on class, for example? Yes, but I still come away from it thinking you might be doing a disservice to even this plot line, especially when it seems that you feel the need to throw in these over-the-top shock value type of things. I actually do have more to say in regards to the shock value aspect of things and the themes of cycles of abuse. I'll get to that in just a moment, but I want to mention a couple of other things I've heard from early screenings. One of them being that the character of Isabella, and this is where I'm going to give more spoilers here, but the character of Isabella is the sister-in-law to Catherine. So the man that Catherine marries, his sister and Heathcliff end up married to each other. And it would seem that based off of some of the reviews that have been coming out, they make this character, it would seem that there's like a kinky aspect to their relationship with Heathcliff. In the book, Isabella is abused by Heathcliff. She's manipulated by him, she is abused by him, and then she does everything she can to escape him. And when she is relaying to someone else the abuse that she's been a victim of, the response is terrible. The response is basically like, wow, how could you talk about him like that? Maybe you need to open up a Bible. It's really terrible, and it kind of goes to show how difficult it is to get away and how often people don't really listen when you are trying to articulate the abuse that you have experienced. I don't think I'm not even arguing that you can't have these sorts of topics in stories, but I do think we have to be very, very, very mindful of what is basically, in this instance, a form of grooming. Heathcliff is trying to manipulate this character for his own gain, for his own goals, and to take advantage of the fact that, he even openly says really terrible things about her, like, I couldn't care less about her, I think she's stupid, but he's still follows through with these things because he's trying to use her, and he is able to do this because she's young and doesn't understand who he actually is, what he's actually after. But I think that when you're going to portray a part of a story or a real thing that occurs, because it does sadly occur, you have to be very, very careful. I get wanting to write movies or write works of fiction where you're exploring darker topics. I get wanting to show the darker sides of people's sexuality. I understand wanting to do that. This is not really the place for it. I think that you should, once again, I said this earlier about the casting of you need to interrogate why you didn't envision the man that is directly stated on page as being a person of color. You didn't envision him as a person of color, but yet you were fine casting the help as people of color. In the same way I said you need to interrogate that, you should also interrogate why you felt the need to add this angle in to this part of the film. Before I knew any of that other stuff, though, I also was very concerned with the fact that when I looked up the casting, I was like, who is cast for the second half of the film? Thinking that maybe they figured some people who want to go see this movie, they've never read the book, they don't know what happens, and so we kind of want to keep it almost like a secret what the second half of the film is. And then I went to look and I'm like, oh, they're not doing the second half, which I know this is not the first time an adaptation of Wuthering Heights has chosen to omit the second half. I think that's stupid. I think it misses the point. I think when you omit the second half, you seem to be under the impression that this is a tragic love story. It's really not. It's really not. I mean, there is tragedy to it, but when I say they seem to be under the impression it's a tragic love story, I mean that I think there's this idea that this is like this beautiful but sad romance where these characters so badly want to be together, but society won't let them. And I'm not even doing that tone of voice to say that those kinds of stories aren't worth telling. Those are definitely worth telling. Those stories can be very powerful and very beautiful and very tragic. But that's not exactly what Wuthering Heights is, but it gets misinterpreted as that so often, probably because within the, I'm going to call it the Wuthering Heights zeitgeist, within that, there has been over and over and over again this misinterpretation that it's a pretty love story, and you're like, it's about cycles of abuse. How do people not see this? And then it would be so nice. It would be so nice if finally, somebody took it upon themselves to accurately put this in a film, and yet they continuously are like, well, you know what sells? Sex. And you know what else sells? Conventionally attractive actors. Let's just throw them in, and then also let's make it super colorful, and let's have off-the-walls aesthetics so that we can also bring in designers so that when we're advertising the movie, we can dress Margot Robbie up in all these pretty outfits, and then look, everybody, look at all the pretty, shiny, sexy things, and also I'm going to add in shocking things, and people will talk about it, and people will want to see my film, and a little bit I'm like, no, I'm sorry, but this is why I'm like, I don't think they are sitting there thinking, how can we trash on the legacy of this author and this book and also make a lot of money in the process. I'm not saying they're like maniacally twisting a mustache thinking these things up, but I don't think that they're putting the care into these really significant themes. And if you want to make a kinky, sexy, weird movie, first off, if you want it to be based off a book, you have so many options now. More options than ever before. So go adapt something else. And second, if you just have an idea and you vaguely were inspired by Wuthering Heights, the characters and the toxicity within that story, but you want to add all these other things, just adding quotes around Wuthering Heights, it's not enough for me. It's not. Especially when you say things, when you have people who are involved in the making of this movie saying things like, it's just a book, and basically, well, the English lit fans. When you're doing stuff like that, I don't know why anybody trusted you. I think Margot Robbie is a part producer of this film, and I'm like, why? Why did nobody go, hey, I don't think this is a good idea? And I said before that I recognize that there's this idea that the more you talk about it, the more curiosity builds, the more people are going to go want to see it. And I'm sharing all of this because I'm like, I don't think so. When I found out more of this, I was like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to put my money toward it. And I have a feeling that a lot of people who actually care about art and who care about these significant themes that are present within this, if we want a kinky, sexy, weird thing, we can get that elsewhere. We don't really want important and heavy topics to be twisted into something that is not what it is at all. I, though, in talking about the cycles of abuse that are present within this film, I kind of reference this in relation to Isabella. I keep talking about how a lot of the story that is a really big theme within it. And I wanted to read something I wrote out because if I try to say it off the cuff, I'm going to annihilate what I'm trying to say. So I'm just going to read what I wrote. I wrote that the author, Emily Bronte, I said, the author has an incredible talent in showing us the ways that small-scale acts of abuse, aggression, and manipulation can still have enormous consequences and can be all-consuming for the victims. And this to me is the core of what I find so often in Hollywood. What we often miss with abuse is that it doesn't have to be this extreme, bloody, battered victim in order for us to recognize that it's abuse. Emily Bronte more accurately depicts what abuse actually looks like. There are a few times where Heathcliff does some pretty awful things that do include physically assaulting someone or even a dog, which is awful. But you, more often than not, you just see him filled with just this bitterness that is inescapable for those that are around him, and how material means and also certain restrictions that are placed on certain individuals based off of society's norms, they do not allow for people to escape these abuses. And I think that the author depicts that really, really exceptionally. And as somebody who grew up in an abusive home, I feel that Emily Bronte captured this better than most other authors that I have ever read from, and also from most other works of fiction that I have consumed in some fashion. The book is, yes, it is looking at class structure. It's also looking at, I'm going to say it till I'm blue in the face, cycles of abuse. And it's looking at how sometimes the root of those abuses are racism. In this instance with Heathcliff, that was part of it. And you also see with the character of Kathy that she is putting herself on that sinking ship, and how unless the person has a willingness to change and to reform themselves, unless they have that, you are not going to be able to fix them, no matter how much you try, no matter how much you insist everybody else adhere to whatever bizarre things they're doing. You ultimately, if you can't release yourself from that person, you are going to sink alongside them. And that's not romantic. That's another thing that's very frustrating about a lot of works of fiction, is that there is this romanticized view of the situation. It's not romantic, it's sad. And if you've lived it, if you've seen it, if you have even been in proximity to it, you know that it's not beautiful. And the advertising for the film, and this is where I want to get into the showmance, the marketing, the trailer, this being the most romantic story, this love story. I wanted to get into this part because I feel really like how they're marketing it is irresponsible. You see this from time to time. If you have a movie that is presenting itself like a love story or a romance, but then in actuality it is depicting abuse, you have to be mindful of the fact that some people want to go into things only knowing a little bit. Maybe they only know what you got from the trailer. They don't want to have to look at every other review just to get an idea. And if you have somebody that has experienced abuse and they go to see a movie that is supposed to be a beautiful, tragic love story and it's actually a story about abuse, that can be very difficult for somebody to sit and watch again if they're experiencing it, if they have experienced it, if a loved one experienced it. So I think it's I'll use the same word, it's irresponsible to market it in this way. It looks like from some of the early things that are being said about it that they are going to show certain grotesque things, but I think if you watch the trailer and the trailer alone, and you see the way that Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi talk about each other and what it was like filming this movie, you might have the wrong impression of what you're getting with this. The showmance side of things, this idea of like, let's present the actors as if they have so much chemistry, and also maybe there's something going on, maybe, I don't know. I don't like this, even if both of the actors are single. I'm not a fan of this. It's especially weird when one or both of the actors are in relationships. In this instance, Margot Robbie is married. I think it's really weird the way that it's not even speculation from magazines. It's things that these actors are saying themselves about each other in various different interviews that they're doing and whatnot. So for example, there's this whole thing about Jacob Elordi filling her room or sending flowers to Margot Robbie's room for Valentine's Day. and her being like, oh my gosh, you're probably such a loving boyfriend. I can tell you'd be such a loving boyfriend. Or them talking about how they're codependent on each other, and her saying, oh, I when he's not around, it makes me feel like a child without their comfort blanket. And they say all these things. And I think a lot of us see it for what it is. It's just like, okay, this is part of the marketing of the film. But even the marketing of the film is presenting it like we're meant to think that these people are in love, and it's pretty and it's a little obsessive. And you're like, I mean, it's terrible, actually. What's in the story is terrible. It's sad. It's awful. It's not cute. It's not romantic. It's not, like, this is what's funny to me. If you're trying to portray Jacob Elordi through this press tour as, like, he is Heathcliff. They keep saying that, too. Margot Robbie, when asked about it, she's like, she gave, I think, a better answer than the casting director, definitely, and the director. Her response is something like, you know what, you'll see. I think when you see him, you'll really feel like he embodies Heathcliff well. She said something like that. And when you're on the press tour and you're trying to present these characters in this way, like this whole idea of like, oh, I bet he'd be a loving boyfriend. No one would think that if you read Heathcliff. So I'm like, you're kind of already failing the assignment of making me believe that these actors are embodying the characters so well. I don't understand this point. Why can't people just, why is this, it's so aggravating, and I know it's to create buzz and to create conversations, but I think a lot of us are tired of it. I know this happened with Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney when they were advertising their movie, which I didn't ever watch, and I'm not going to, but they had their whole thing, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, it actually resulted in him and his girlfriend at the time, them breaking off their relationship because of the fact that we apparently are prioritizing how we sell chemistry. And you're like, you can just be yourselves. I would rather be so shocked, because I think a great example is the actress that plays Jessica Jones. When you see her in various different interviews, you're like, oh my gosh, because she is completely different from her character. And so to me, I'm like, wow, what a good actor. I would never have known that you're like this in real life. You're so bubbly and happy, and even your voice is different. And then you see the show, and she's not like that. Oh, she's a rough around the edges kind of grungy character. So I actually find it to be more impressive when the actors aren't doing this weird, we're going to create this fantasy for you while doing the marketing, and then that fantasy you're going to get to see realized in the film. I don't need that. I don't need it. Really, I don't. I also think that some of the behaviors they've talked about with everybody involved in the project, like, I think the director put shrines of each other, meaning within Jacob Elordi's room, there was a Catherine shrine / Margot Robbie, and then in Margot Robbie's there was a Jacob Elordi Heathcliff shrine, and they put locks of hair or something like that. And the locks of hair are meant to represent something within the book, so that, I think, if you don't know about the book, you'd be like, ew, but actually it ties to something to do with the book. But regardless, this whole like, oh yeah, they set up this shrine, that feeling, and then also apparently, and I think it was probably Jacob Elordi was just kind of enjoying watching other people do their scenes, even if he wasn't participating in them. But there are comments about like, oh, he would just linger and would just be watching. And I was like, Margot Robbie said something like, I asked the director, did you tell him to do that to really create this feeling of like, oh, Heathcliff is just always there? And the director's like, I didn't tell him to do that. And I'm like, kind of just sounds like the guy was watching the scene. In the same way, I've been in pit orchestras before, and so often you don't see what's going on stage. So sometimes during rehearsals, it's kind of fun to watch the singers and the dancing and stuff, because you're like, oh, I never actually get to see this. It was probably just kind of like that. I think his response to that was basically like, I mean, I'm working with Margot Robbie. I really want to see how she works. But they presented it as like this, it was borderline creepy and weird, which also was very, very Heathcliff. Am I right? They presented it like that. And I also am not a fan of this whole, I'm totally spacing on method acting. I was spacing on the term. This method acting thing of like, we can get away with basically harassing our coworkers by just being like, but I'm an actor. I must embody the characters so that I can know what I'm doing when I'm finally playing them. And you're just like, you're not a very good actor. The whole point is you're supposed to be acting like them in that moment, not all the time. If you can't turn it off and on, you need to work on that skill a little bit more. But I do think that method acting is an excuse sometimes. I'm not saying there are never legitimate approaches to method acting, but I do think sometimes it's an excuse for people to just be completely inappropriate and to get away with doing things that are not technically legally okay in a work environment. I don't think that it was going that far by any means. It doesn't sound like there was harassment on set or anything like that. But I do think some of this weird, oh, let's do like shrines in each other's trailers, and the way they're presenting what was probably a innocent Jacob Elordi just watching a scene, the way they present it, I recognize, again, it's to create chatter, but I think a lot of us are done with it. And also, the more that actors do this on press tours, the less I want to watch the film. So I'm talking about this part in so much as saying that not only do I feel like the film itself is already speaking for itself in regards to the fact that it doesn't sound very good, but also how you're presenting it. You're losing me also in how you talk about it. If you were more like, I know people have some thoughts about what they're seeing, but if you see the film, you'll see we took it in a direction that I think a lot of people are actually going to be surprised by, but in a good way. In a good way. If you said something like that, I'd be like, maybe, I don't know. Maybe you do say something and I'm being misled and you're creating curiosity and intrigue. But I don't feel like that's what they're doing even a little. That would be more interesting to me than whatever they're doing currently. Beyond that, though, this concept has existed far before many of us were even born. I mean, this was a thing that was happening back when films were in black and white. And one of the things that this was used for was to hide the sexuality of some of the actors. So the fact that that's one of the additional origins of this, I think that should really cue for some people that maybe they shouldn't partake in this sort of presentation. Anyway, those are all the reasons why I think the upcoming Wuthering Heights adaptation looks like a pile of trash. I think it looks awful. Everything that everybody has said about it, who's involved in the project, has only made it seem much worse instead of easing some of our concerns about it. I don't trust them with this work. I think they need to maybe decide, oh, I would love to do an adaptation of this. I don't know if I'm the right person for it, though. I wish there would be a little bit more reflection on those sorts of things. I'm very curious to know what all of you think. I know this is a little outside what I typically get into because most of the time if we're talking about adaptations, we're talking about not classics adaptations, but I just read Wuthering Heights, and I did not read it because I saw the movie was coming out and I wanted to read it before the movie. I didn't read it for that reason whatsoever, and I do plan to have a deep dive in the same way I did a discussion, an in-depth analysis and discussion for Frankenstein. I do plan to do that for Wuthering Heights as well. If ever I watch this film, it will not be with my hard-earned money. I'm not going to spend money. It would be if it's like streamed or something. And the point would be myself and my friend who's obsessed with Wuthering Heights. Also, she has her own channel. I'll have her linked. And my husband. We would probably watch it together and react to it so that if you like me, if you're like, I don't want to spend my money on it, but if you also are like, but I kind of want to see what other people think of it, or I'm curious, but I don't want to spend the money, then I can provide you don't need to go see it. You can just watch us see it. And maybe, if more reviews come out and it turns out that everything I talked about, I'm completely wrong, and they had an artistic vision that really captures the story, and if they were just purposefully pretending to not understand the book whatsoever in answering questions and doing the press tour, if they were doing that all on purpose so that they could actually surprise people by having a really, really well done film, if that's what turns out to happen, I will eat all my words. I will point back to this and say I was completely wrong. It turned out it was fantastic, and bravo to them. I would love to be wrong. I would love to be wrong. Still doesn't change actually my criticisms about how they're handling all this, but if the film itself turned out to be really great, then maybe I would eat some of my words. But in the meantime, I'm not going to go see this film. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. And if you are somebody who's going to go see the film, I said this at the very beginning. I'm not in any way trying to guilt anybody who does try to see it. I think there are legitimate reasons why people might be curious about reviewing this and seeing it for themselves. Maybe they feel similar to me, but they don't actually think I can have these thoughts unless I actually see the film. There's a lot of reasons why people might want to go and see it, even if they have their reservations. And if that's you and you do end up seeing it, I'm curious what you're going to end up thinking of it. Anyway, though, feel free to chime in about any of your thoughts on all of this. I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you're interested in the classics series that I'm going to be doing throughout this year, then I will try to stay up to date with those. I'll have the Frankenstein one linked. I'll have the Wuthering Heights video up soon. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.